Hello everyone, my name's Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Today we're reading page 189 to 220 or 230 if I'm not mistaken, which means it's 21 pages today, which is not that bad. So without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 43. We weren't always homeless, Zero said. I remember a yellow room. How old were you when you started to ask, but couldn't find the right words. Moved out. I don't know. I must have been real little because I don't remember too much. I don't remember moving out. I remember standing in a crib with my mother singing to me. She held my wrist and made my hands clap together. She used to sing that song to me, the one you sang. It was different, though. Zero spoke slowly, as if searching his brain for memories and clues. And if later I know we lived on the street. But I don't know why we left the house. I'm pretty sure it was a house and not an apartment. Oh, I know my room was yellow. It was late afternoon. They were resting in the shadow of the thumb. They had spent the morning picking onions and putting them in the sack. It didn't take long, but long enough so that they had to wait another day before heading down the mountain. They wanted to leave the first hint of daylight, so they had plenty of time to make it to Camp Green Lake before dark. Stanley wanted to be sure to find the right hole. Then they would hide by it until everyone went to sleep. They would dig along as it seemed safe, and not a second longer. And then, treasure or no treasure, they'd head up the dirt road. If it was absolutely safe, they'd try to steal some food and water from the camp kitchen. I'm good at sneaking in and out of places, Zero had said. Remember, Stanley had warned, the door to the rec room squeaks. Now he lay on his back, trying to save his strength through the long days ahead. He wondered what happened to Zero's parents, but he didn't ask. Zero didn't like answering questions. It was better to just let him talk what he felt like it. Stanley thought of his own parents. In her last letter, Mom was worried that he might have been evicted from their apartment because of the smell of burning sneakers. They could easily become homeless as well. Again, he wondered if they were told that he ran away from camp. Were they told that he was dead? An image appeared in his head of his parents hugging each other and crying. He tried not to think about it. Instead, he tried to recapture the feelings he had the night before, the inexplicable feeling of happiness, the sense of destiny. But those feelings didn't return. He just felt scared. The next morning, they headed down the mountain. They dunked their caps in a water hole before putting them on their heads. Zero held the shovel, and Stanley carried a sack, with it crammed with onions and 3 jars of water. They left the pieces of broken jar in the mountain. This is where I found the shovel, Stanley said, pointing out a patch in the weeds. Zero turned and looked up toward the top of the mountain. That's a long way. You were light, Stanley said. You'd already thrown up everything that was inside your stomach. He shifted his sack under one shoulder to the other. It was heavy. He stepped on a loose rock, slipped, and fell hard. The next thing he knew, he was sliding down a steep side of the mountain. He dropped the sack and onions spilled around him. He slid into a patch of weeds and grabbed onto a thorny vine. The vine ripped out of the earth, but slowed him enough that he was able to stop himself. Are you all right? Zero asked from above. Stanley groaned and pulled a thorn out of the palm of his hand. Yeah, he said. He was all right. He was worried more about the jars than water. Zero climbed down after him, retrieving the sack along the way. Stanley pulled some thorns out of his pant legs. The jars hadn't broken. The onions had protected them. They're like styrofoam packing material. Glad you didn't do what you were carrying me, Zero said. And they had lost about a third of the onions, but recovered many of them as they continued down the mountain. When they reached the bottom, the sun was rising above the lake. They walked directly toward it. Soon they stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down on the dry lake bed. Stanley wasn't sure, but he thought he could see the remains of Mary Lou off in the distance. You thirsty? Stanley asked. No, said Zero. How about you? No, Stanley lied. He didn't want to be the first one to take a drink. Although they didn't mention it, it became kind of a challenge between him and Zero. They climbed down into the frying pan. There was a different spot from where they had climbed up. They eased themselves down the ledge to another and let themselves slide into their place, being especially careful with the sack. Stanley could no longer see the Mary Lou, but headed thought he was the right direction as the sun rose just did a familiar haze of the heat and dirt. You thirsty? Zero asked. No, said Stanley. Because you have 3 full jars of water, said Zero. I thought maybe it was getting too heavy for you. If you drink some, you'll lighten your load. I'm not thirsty, said Stanley. But if you want a drink, I'll give you some. I'm not thirsty, said Zero. I was worried about you. Stanley smiled. I'm a camel, he said. They walked for seemed like a very long time and still never came across Mary Lou. Stanley was pretty sure they were heading in the right direction. He remembered that they left the boat. They were headed toward the setting sun. Now that they were heading toward the rising sun, he knew the sun didn't rise and set exactly in the east and west, nor more southwest, southeast, and southwest. But he wasn't sure how that made a difference. His throat smelled as if he was coated with sandpaper. "You sure you're not thirsty?" he asked. "Not me," said Zero. His voice was dry and raspy. When they did finally take a drink, they agreed to do it at the same time. Zero was now carrying the sack, set it down, and took 2 jars, giving one to Stanley. They decided to leave the canteen for last, since it couldn't accidentally break. "You know, I'm not thirsty," Stanley said as he unscrewed the lid. "I'm just drinking so you will." "I'm just drinking so you will," said Zero. They clinked the jars together and, each watching the other, poured water into their stubborn mouths. Zero was the first to spot the Mary Lou, maybe a quarter-mile away, and it was just a little out of sight, to the right. They headed for it. It wasn't even noon yet when they reached the boat. They sat against the shady side and rested. "I don't know what happened to my mother," Zero said. "She left and never came back." Stanley peeled an onion. "She couldn't always take me with her," Zero said. "Sometimes she had to do things by herself." Stanley had the feeling that Zero had explained things to himself. "He'd tell me to wait in a certain place for her. Then when I was real little, I would wait in small areas, like on a porch step or a doorway. 'Now don't leave me here until I get back,' she'd say. I never liked it when she left. I had a stuffed animal, a little giraffe, and I hugged it the whole time she was gone. When I got bigger, I was allowed to stay in bigger areas, like stay on this block, or don't leave the park. But even then, I still held Jaffy." Stanley guessed that Jaffy was the name of Zero's giraffe. "And then one day she didn't come back," Zero said. His voice sounded suddenly hollow. "I waited for her at Langley Park." "Langley Park?" said Stanley. "I've been there." "You know the playscape?" said Zero. "Yeah, I played on it. I waited there for more than a month," said Zero. "You know that tunnel you crawl through between the slide and the swinging bridge? That's where I slept. They ate 4 onions apiece and drank about half a jar of water." Stanley stood up and looked around. Everything looked the same in all directions. "When I left the camp, I was heading straight for Big Thumb," he said. "I saw a boat off to the right, so that means we have to turn a little to the left." Zero was lost in thought. "What? Okay," he said. They headed out. It was only Stanley's turn to carry the sack. "Some kids had a birthday party," Zero said. "Guess it was about 2 weeks after my mother left. There was a picnic table next to the playscape and balloons were tied to it. The kids looked to be the same age as me. One girl said hi to me and asked me if I wanted to play. I wanted to, but I didn't. I knew I didn't belong at the party, even though I wasn't their playscape. There was one mother who kept staring at me like I was some kind of monster. Then later a boy asked me if I wanted a piece of cake. But then the same mother told me to go away, and she told all the kids to stay away from me. So I never got my piece of cake, and I ran away so fast I forgot Jaffy. Did you ever find him?" "It?" For a moment, Zero didn't answer, and he said he wasn't real. Stanley thought again about his own parents, how awful it would be for them to never know he was dead or alive. He realized that how Zero must have felt, not knowing what happened to his own mother. He wondered why Zero had never mentioned his father. "Hold on," Zero thought, abruptly. "We're going the wrong way." "No, this is right," said Stanley. "We were heading toward Big Thumb, then you saw the boat off to your right," said Zero. "That means we should have turned right when we left the boat." "You sure?" Zero drew a diagram in the dirt. Stanley still wasn't sure. "We need to go this way," Zero said, drawing a last line on the map and then heading that way himself. Stanley followed, but it didn't feel right to him, but Zero seemed sure. Sometime in the middle of the afternoon, a cloud drifted across the sky and blocked out the sun. It was welcoming relief. Once again, Stanley felt the destiny was on his side. Zero stopped and held his arm to stop Stanley too. "Listen," Zero whispered. Stanley didn't hear anything. They continued walking very quietly, and Stanley began to make out faint sounds of Camp Green Lake. They were still too far away to see the camp, but they could hear a blend of indistinct voices. As they got closer, they occasionally would hear Mr. Sir's distinctive bark. As they walked slowly and quietly, aware of the sounds traveling in both directions, they approached the cluster of holes. "Let's wait here until they go in," said Zero. Stanley nodded. They checked to make sure there was nothing living in it, then climbed down into the hole. Zero climbed into the one next to him. Despite having gone the wrong way for a while, it hadn't taken them nearly as long as Stanley had expected. Now they just had to wait. The sun cut through the cloud, and Stanley felt its rays beating down on him. But soon more clouds filled the sky, shading the Stanley in his hole. He waited until the last campers had finished for the day. Then he waited for a little longer. As quietly as possible, he and Zero climbed up out of their holes and crept toward the camp. Stanley held a sack in front of him, cradled it in his arms, instead of over his shoulder, to keep the jars from clanking against each other. The wave of terror rushed over him when he saw a compound, the tents, the rec room, and the warden's cabin under 2 oak trees. The fear made him dizzy. He took a breath, summoned his courage, and continued. "That's the one," he whispered, pointing at the hole where he had found the gold tube. It was about 50 yards away, but Stanley was pretty sure it was the right hole. There was no need to risk going any closer. They climbed down to an adjacent holes and waited for the camp to fall asleep. Chapter 44. Stanley tried to sleep, but not knowing he would get the chance again. He heard the showers and later the sounds of dinner. He heard the creaking in the rec room door. His fingers drummed against the side of the hole. He heard his own heartbeat. He took a drink from the canteen. He had given Zero the water jars. They each had a good supply of onions. He wasn't sure how long they remained in the hole, maybe 5 hours. He was surprised when he heard Zero whispering for him to wake up. He didn't think he'd fallen asleep. If he had, he must have thought it must have been like 5 minutes. Although, when he opened his eyes, he was surprised how dark it was. There was only one light at the camp, in the office. The sky was cloudy, so there was very little starlight. Stanley could see a silver of the moon, which appeared to be disappeared among the clouds. He carefully led Zero to the hole, which was part of fine in the darkness. He stumbled over a small pile of dirt. "I think this is it," he whispered. "You think?" Zero asked. "This is it," said Stanley, sounding more certain than he really was. He climbed down. Zero handed him a shovel. Stanley stuck the shovel into the dirt in the bottom of the hole and stepped back at the blade. He felt it sink beneath its weight. He scooped up some dirt and tossed it off to the side. Then he brought the shovel back down. Zero watched for a while. "I'm going to try to refill the water jars," he said. Stanley took a deep breath and exhaled. "Be careful," he said, and continued digging. It was so dark he couldn't even see the end of his shovel. For all he knew, he was digging up golds and diamonds instead of dirt. He brought each shovel close to his face to try to see if anything was there, before dumping it into another hole. As he made the hole deeper, it became harder to lift the dirt up and out. It was 5 feet deep before he even started. He decided to use his efforts to make it wider instead. This made more sense, he told himself. If Kate Barlow had buried the treasure, she probably wouldn't have been able to dig much deeper, so why should he? Of course, Kate Barlow probably had a whole gang of thieves helping her. "You want some breakfast?" Stanley jumped in the sound of Zero's voice. He hadn't heard him approach. Zero handed down a box of cereal. Stanley carefully poured some cereal into his mouth. He didn't want to put his dirty hands inside the box. He nearly gagged an ultra-sweet taste. There was sugar frosted flakes, and after eating nothing but onions for more than a week, he had trouble adjusting to the flavor. He washed them down with a swig of water. Zero took over to the digging. Stanley sifted his fingers through the fresh piles of dirt in case he missed anything. He wished he had a flashlight. A diamond no bigger than a pebble would be worth thousands of dollars. Yet there was no way to see it. He finished the water, as Zero had forgotten from the spigot by the shower. Stanley said he'd go fill the jars again, but Zero insisted that he do it instead. "No offense, but you make too much noise when you walk. You're too big." Stanley returned to the hole. His hole grew wider. Parts of the surface kept caving in. They were running out of room. And make it much wider, they first had to move some of the surrounding dirt piles out of the way. He wondered how much time they had before the camp woke up. "How's it going?" Zero asked when he returned with the water. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. He brought the shovel down to the side of the hole, shaving off a slice of dirt wall. As he did so, he felt the shovel bounce off something hard. "What was that?" Zero asked. Stanley didn't know. He moved the shovel up and down inside of the hole. As the dirt chipped and flaked away, the hard object became more pronounced. It was sticking out of the side of the hole, about 1.5 feet from the bottom. He felt it with his hands. "What is it?" Zero asked. He could just feel the corner of it. Most of it was still buried. It had the cool, smooth texture of metal. "I think I might have found a treasure chest," he said. His voice was filled with more autonomous than excitement. "Really?" asked Zero. "I think so," Stanley said. The hole was wide enough for him to hold the shovel lengthwise and dig sideways into the wall. He knew he had to dig very carefully. He didn't want the side of the hole to collapse. Along the huge pile of dirt directly above it, he scraped the dirt wall until he exposed more of the side of the box-like object. He ran his fingers over it. It felt to be about 8 inches tall and almost 2 feet wide. He had no way of knowing how far into the earth it extended. He tried pulling it out, but it wouldn't budge. He thought about that, and the only thing he could get is to start back at the surface and dig down. They didn't have time for that. "I'm going to try to dig the hole underneath it," he said. "Then maybe I can pull it down and slip it out." "Go for it," said Zero. Stanley zipped the shovel into the bottom edge of the hole and carefully began to dig the tunnel underneath the metal object. He hoped it didn't cave in. Occasionally he stooped down and tried to feel the far end of the box, but even when the tunnel was long as an arm, he couldn't feel the other side. Once again he tried pulling it out, but firmly in the ground. He pulled too hard, he feared. It would cause a cave-in. He knew it wasn't ready to pull out. He would have to do it quickly before the ground above it collapsed. As the tunnel grew deeper and wider, the more precarious. Stanley was able to feel latches on the end of the box and then the leather handle. It was really a box. "I think it might be some kind of metal suitcase," he told Zero. "Don't pry it too loose with the shovel," Zero suggested. "I'm afraid the side of the hole will collapse." "You might as well give it a try," said Zero. Stanley took a sip of water. "Might as well," he said. He forced the tip of the shovel between the dirt and the top of the metal case and tried to wedge it free. He wished he could see what he was doing. He worked at the end of the shovel back and forth, up and down, until he felt the suitcase fall free. Then he felt dirt piling down on top of it. It wasn't a huge cave-in. As he knelt down the hole, he could try only a small portion of the earth and collapse. He dug with his hands until he found the leather handle, and then he pulled the suitcase up and out of the dirt. "I got it," he exclaimed. He was heavy. He handed it up to Zero. "You did it," Zero said, taking it from him. "We did it," said Stanley. He gathered his remaining strength and tried to pull himself out of the hole. Suddenly, a bright light was shining in his face. "Thank you," said the warden. "You boys have been a big help." Chapter 25. The beam of flashlight was directed away from Stanley's eyes and onto Zero's, who was sitting on his knees. The suitcase was on his lap. Mr. Burdensky was holding the flashlight. Mr. Sir stood next to him, with his gun drawn, pointing at the same direction. Mr. Sir was barefoot and bare-chested, wearing only his pajama bottoms. The warden moved toward Zero. She was in her bed clothes, wearing an extra-long t-shirt. Unlike Mr. Sir, however, she had it on her boots. Mr. Burdensky was only one fully dressed. Perhaps he was on guard duty. Off in the distance, Stanley could see two more flashlights, bobbing toward them in the darkness. He felt happiness in the hole, helpless in the hole. You boys arrived just in the nick of time, the warden started to say. She stopped talking and stopped walking when she slowly backed away. A lizard had crawled on top of the suitcase. Its big red eyes glowed in a beam of flashlight. Its mouth was open, and Stanley could see its white tongue moving in and out with its black teeth. Zero sat still as a statue. Second lizard crawled up over the side of the suitcase, stopped less than an inch away from Zero's little finger. Stanley was afraid to look and not afraid to. He wondered if he could try to scrap out of the hole before the lizard turned on him. He didn't want to cause any commotion. The second lizard crawled towards Zero's fingers and halfway up his arm. It occurred to Stanley that the lizards were probably on the suitcase when he handed it to Zero. "There's another one," said Mr. Burdensky. He shone the flashlight on the box of frosted flakes, which lay on its side beside Stanley's hole. A lizard was crawling out of it. The light also illuminated Stanley's hole. He gleamed downward and forced himself to suppress a scream. He was standing in a lizard nest. He felt a scream explode inside him. He could see 6 lizards. There were 3 on the ground, 2 on his left leg, and 1 on his right sneaker. He tried to remain very still, some of them crawling up the back of his neck. 3 other counselors approached the area. Stanley heard one say, "What's going?" and then whisper, "Oh my God." "What do we do?" asked Mr. Burdensky. "We wait," said the warden. "It won't be very long. At least we'll have a body to give that woman," said Mr. Burdensky. "She's going to ask a lot of questions," said Mr. Sir, "and this time we'll have an AG with her. Let her ask her questions," said the warden. "Just as long as I have the suitcase, I don't care what happens. Do you know how long?" Her voice trailed off, then started again. "When I was little, I watched my parents dig holes every weekend and holiday. When I got bigger, I had to dig too, even on Christmas." Stanley felt tiny claws dig into the side of his face, and the lizard pulled itself out of his neck and tried to pass his chin. "It won't be long now," said the warden. Stanley could hear his heartbeat. Each beat told him he was still alive, at least for one more second. Chapter 46. 500 seconds later, his heart was still beating. Mr. Burdensky screamed. The lizard, which had been in the cereal box, was springing toward him. Mr. Sir shot it in midair. Stanley felt the blast shatter the air around him. The lizard scurried frantically across his very still body. He did not flinch. The lizard ran across his closed mouth. He glanced at Zero, and Zero's eyes met his. Somehow they were both still alive. That at least for one more second, one more heartbeat. Mr. Sir lit a cigarette. "I thought you quit," said one of the other counselors. Well, sometimes sunflower seeds just won't cut it." He took a long drag of a cigarette. "I'm going to have nightmares for the rest of my life." "Maybe we should just shoot them," suggested Mr. Burdensky. "Woo," said the counselors. "The lizards or the kids?" Mr. Burdensky laughed grimly. "The kids are going to die anyway," he laughed again. "At least they got plenty of graves to choose from." "We got time," said the warden. "I've waited this long. I can't wait another few." Her voice trailed off. Stanley felt a lizard crawl in and out of his pocket. "We're going to keep our story simple," said the warden. "That woman's going to ask a lot of questions. The AG will most likely initiate an investigation. So this has happened." Stanley tried to run away in the night, fell in the hole, and the lizards got him. "That's it. We're not going to give them Zero's body. As far as anybody knows, Zero doesn't exist, like Mom said. We got plenty of graves to choose from." "Why would he run away if he knew he was getting released today?" said Mr. Burdensky. "Who knows? He's crazy. That was why he couldn't release him yesterday. He was delirious, and we had to keep watch over him, and he couldn't hurt himself or anybody else." "She's not going to like it," said Mr. Burdensky. "She's not going to like anything we tell her," said the warden. She stared at Zero at the suitcase. "Why aren't you dead yet?" she asked. Stanley only half listened and talked to the counselors. He didn't know who that woman was or AG meant. He didn't even realize they were initials. That sounded like one word, AG. His mind was focused on the tiny claws that moved up and down his skin through his hair. He tried to think about other things. He didn't want to die with the images of the warden, Mr. Sir, and the lizards etched into his brain. Instead, he tried to see his mother's face. His brain looking back on time when he was little, all bundled up in a snowsuit. He and the mother were talking hand in hand, mitten in mitten, when they both slipped on some ice and fell, rolled down the snow-covered hillside. They ended up in the bottom of the hill. He remembered he almost cried, but instead he laughed. His mother laughed, too. He could feel the same lightheaded feeling he felt then, dizzy. He rolled down the hill. He felt the sharp coldness of the snow against his ear. He could see flecks of snow in his mother's bright, cheery face. This is where he wanted to be when he died. "Hey, caveman, guess what?" said Mr. Sir. You're innocent after all. I thought you would like to know that. Your lawyer came to get you yesterday. Too bad you weren't here." The words meant nothing to Stanley, who was still in the snow. He and his mother climbed up the hill and rolled down again, this time on purpose. Later they had hot chocolate with lots of melted marshmallows. "It's getting close to 4:30, said Mr. Burdensky. "They'll be waking up." The wardens and all the counselors returned to their tents. She told them to give the campers breakfast and make sure they didn't talk to anyone. As long as they did that, as they were told, they wouldn't have to dig any more holes. If they walked, they would be severely punished. How could we say we'll be punished? One of the counselors asked. Let them use their imagination, said the warden. Stanley watched the counselors return to the tents, leaving only the warding Mr. Sir behind. He knew the warden didn't care whether the campers dug any more holes or not. He found what she was looking for. He glanced at Zero. Lizard was perched on his shoulder. Zero remained perfectly still except for his right hand, which was slowly shortened into a fist when he raised his thumb, giving Stanley a thumbs-up sign. Stanley thought back of what Mr. Sir had said to them earlier, and the bits of conversation he overheard. He tried to make sense of it. Mr. Sir had said something about a lawyer, but Stanley knew his parents couldn't afford a lawyer. His legs were sore from remaining rigid for so long. Standing still was more strenuous than walking. He slowly allowed himself to lean against the side of the hole. The lizards didn't seem to mind. And we leave this on a cliffhanger. Very spooky, but the next time we read, it's going to be the final reading episode, so that's good, huh? Anyways, yeah. Next time we are reading pages 211 to... what exactly? 211 to 233. 211 to 233. And yeah. That's how that one's gonna go. 211 to 233. It's gonna be 22 pages. And yeah, shouldn't be that bad. So I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. If you like being fishing, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.